my epoxy fillets are all fully cured here, and we can do a test fit. So we'll just slide this up into the body tube. That goes in nicely, and then we will line up the launch lug here with the cluster motor that has the motor clip back down in here. Okay, so that all fits nicely. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm painting the fins and cluster mounts a different color than the rest of the body in the nose cone. So before I mount this, I'm going to go ahead and paint this. So I'll give the whole thing here another coat of primer, and that will show up any imperfections that I may need to fill in the fillets. The stuff up here toward the forward edge on the centering ring, that's all going to be hidden. So unless there's something structurally wrong with it, I'm not going to worry about it. So first of all, I'm just going to mask this off. Now, it's not a big deal if I get some overspray onto the stuffer tube there, because it will also be mounted up inside the rocket eventually. But I do want to avoid paint on the edge here, because that's where the glue is going to adhere to the body tube. Okay. Alright, I'm going to go off camera with this and get it all primed and painted, and I'll come back to work on part of the recovery system. Now, a parachute does not come with this kit, but in the instructions, in one part it recommends a 24 to 30 inch parachute, and elsewhere it says a 36-inch parachute. So what I've got here is a 32-inch plastic parachute, and at least for the first couple of flights here, this is what I'll use. If I decide that we're using a whole bunch of motors, maximum clusters, things like that, I'll go to a larger parachute. But I think this should be more than enough for the initial flights. This is a plastic parachute. It's got nice sturdy carpet string type of shroud lines, and I've got it hooked into a snap swivel here so it's easily changed out. Here I have the painted fin assembly and cluster motor mount here. I've gone with a navy blue, and then the rest of the rocket, the body tube is going to be white, the nose cone is going to be red, and this is in part because I'm building this for a project for my college where I work, and crimson and navy are the college's colors, not covers. This needs to continue to dry though, and we'll insert this probably tomorrow after the paint has had a good overnight cure. Now that the fillets on the fins are fully cured, we can attach the shock cord anchor here. So for this, you're going to need this piece of cable, and then we have two crimp connectors there. They're also calling these loop connectors, whatever you want to call them here. And then we have two pieces of shrink wrap tubing. So the first thing we're going to do is just take one end of this and thread it through one of the holes here. I'm going to turn this around. All right, so this is going to go through a hole, and use whichever end is less frayed here. Alright, now if they're both frayed, depending on how strong your fingers are, you can bend these back a bit, give them a little twist. There we go. Okay, and then you're going to feed it back out through the other hole, like that. Okay, and now you're going to move one end down. Oop, almost lost it there. Alright, so we want most of this out. Ouch. Like that. Alright, and then we're going to take one of these crimp connectors and put both loops through it. Now, these are really tiny, and these have become frayed a bit. And so I'm going to do something here, kind of like what you would do for Kevlar, is I'm going to apply just a little bit of super glue to this to keep it from fraying further. And we want it to soak in down to an area below where the fray is. Okay, and then we'll just take a tissue here and wipe that off. And then you can use some super glue accelerator, most of which are just alcohol. And just do that to them. And then I'm going to take a pair of wire cutters here and just cut those off below the fray. Maybe easier said than done. Alright, I'm going to get a different pair of wire cutters. Alright, here I'm using some bigger things here. Let's try some aluminum cutters. Sheet metal cutters here. See, the problem is just not quite getting that bend. Alright, heavy duty side cutters here. That's better. Alright, so that will become the tool of choice here. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and slip this compression connector on. And this has to go through both. Okay, and now using either a crimping tool or some heavy pliers, we're going to crush that. Alright, we'll see if the crimping tool actually crimps this time. Okay, and then they recommend putting a little bit of super glue there at that crimp, and we'll just let it soak into the cables. Okay, then next we're going to slide both pieces of shrink wrap tubing over the cable here, and then we're going to make another loop by putting the other crimp connector on here and then feeding it back on itself. Okay, and then once again we'll crimp that in place. Okay, and then a little more super glue. Kind of moved there while I was doing this. Hopefully we got to see it all here. Alright, so now we're going to move that first bit of heat shrink tubing back. And here you can use a hair dryer or a heat gun or just a lighter. If you're going to use a lighter, just be careful you don't catch stuff on fire. Alright, and just don't hold it in one place very long. We're going to flip this over. Okay, so it should look like that. And then we'll take the other one here and do the same thing. And do be aware that that cable is going to get hot too. It conducts heat. There we go. And we'll just let that cool for a few seconds, and then we'll come back and we should be ready to almost put this into the tube. Next, we're ready to attach the shock cords, and we have two of them here. So one of them is Kevlar. All right, they call it polyaramid, which is just generic for the brand name Kevlar here. Alright, so go ahead and unravel it, and the first thing I'm going to do is put some super glue on the ends here, right below where they've frayed. And just let that soak for a few seconds, and then we can wipe off the excess. And this should prevent them from fraying further. Now, since this is kind of thick, I'm going to add just a little bit of alcohol to these to speed that up. For thinner stuff, you can almost just get away with wiping it off and you're done. Okay, then I'm going to take my hobby knife here and now cut off those frayed parts. Okay, so now I'm going to take, and this is going to be a little bit different from the instructions, which just have us tie it on here. What I'm going to do instead is make a loop in one end of the Kevlar. About like that. Okay, pull that good and tight. Like I did with the end, I'm going to put just a drop of super glue on the Kevlar there and let it soak in. And here I'm just going to dab off the excess. Okay, and now what we're going to do here is I'm going to put this loop over the cable. Okay, so this right now that loop is freely moving. And I'm going to put the other end through the cable loop, pull that all the way through. Alright, even let that knot get through, hopefully it can. There we go. Alright, and that gives us a nice strong union with less chance of unraveling than just tying a knot on there would. Now we have the elastic shock cord, and this goes in parallel. This is actually one of the unique things about this kit. I've never seen someone do this, although I've thought about doing it myself. All right, so this needs to be shorter than the Kevlar does. Otherwise it's kind of useless. So the idea here is that the elastic shock cord will absorb some of the energy. Alright, but it only stretches as far as the Kevlar does. So it kind of gives you the strength of Kevlar with the energy absorption of the elastic. Okay, so for this one, if I had a bigger loop here, I would tie it on in the same way, but I don't. So instead, I'm just going to push this through. I am going to tie this with a double knot or 2 half hitches. Just like that. Now instead of super glue, which would damage the elastic, I'm just going to put a little dab of wood glue on here. You can use white glue as well if you don't have wood glue handy. Okay, but I'm just going to put a little dab right here in the knot. Work that in, and I'm going to cut off a little bit of this. Don't get it too close to the knot though, because we don't want any unraveling or having that pull through. Once we've got everything glued on and knotted there, we're just going to wrap it all up loosely here. It's going to be looser than that. Because what we need to do is stuff all this down into the motor mount and stuffer tube here. What I made you do here is just pull everything all the way through. If you need to, you can use a dowel for this. And you're going to need a fairly long dowel anyway for the next step. Well, it's stuffing through but not coming out the back end, so that's okay. We can do this. But we want as much of this stuff out of the way as we can, so we don't accidentally glue things where they don't need to be. Alright, so looking about like that. If it comes out the aft end of the rocket, that's fine. You can pull it out or stuff it back in. We just want all this stuff out of the way so that we can put this into the body tube. Okay, so once again here I'm going to do a dry fit. I'm just going to pull that up there. Okay, so this is going to go in like this. The end with the flush launch lug is the aft end. Alright, we've still got our forward launch lug there, and you won't be able to see this, but looking down inside I can see the forward centering ring. Okay, and then again I want to make sure that where my engine clip is, it's right there. Alright, and so I'm going to align this cluster tube with my launch lug right here. Okay, so when we go to glue this all together, that's where it's going to go. Okay, now we're going to need probably either 15 or 30-minute epoxy, because we actually want this to flow a little bit and even itself out. So what have I got here? I've got some 30-minute epoxy. We'll use that, and we're going to need a fairly large amount. Now, before we mix up the epoxy, we need to take our dowel here and we're going to mark it at about 14 inches. Alright, so there's 12 there. And give it another 2, so 14 inches about right here. Okay, and I'm going to make up probably about 10 grams of epoxy here. That should be enough for both centering rings. Okay, the details of this may be hard to show, but we'll try and get everything under the camera here. So I've mixed up my 30-minute epoxy here, and I've got my dowel with its marking on it, and this is the aft end of the rocket body tube. So I'm going to take my dowel here and get a nice dollop of epoxy on it. Alright, and don't try and do it all at once or you'll just end up with globs like that. Alright, I'm going to go into my 14-inch mark there. And I'm just going to make a loop around there. We're putting a band of epoxy inside. I forgot to put down my paper towels, so clean up this mess quick. Alright, and as long as it hasn't hardened yet, you can clean up epoxy with alcohol. Alright, now to continue here. Alright, I'm going to take a peek down inside here. Okay, it looks like I've got a pretty good band there. Now when you do that, be careful because there's nothing to hold the epoxy from coming out the other end. So just be careful that you don't tip it up to check it out and then you end up dripping epoxy on your floor. Okay, so now that we've got that, I'll just quickly clean off the dowel here so I can use it again for other stuff. Okay, I've still got epoxy left here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put in, let's see if I can get this under the camera. Alright, so I'm sliding in the forward centering ring and the stuffer tube there. And once again I'm locating my engine clip. Alright, and now I'm going to put some more epoxy just inside of the body tube there. And this way the aft centering ring will also be glued into place nicely. Okay, and you're going to want this just inside. Give about ½ an inch there, or a centimeter or so beyond the edge. And this is why we're using the longer setting epoxy, is we do need to do a lot of working and turning here. And if you use 5-minute epoxy, you may run out of time before it hardens. Okay, so now we've got that in there. Alright, one last time I'm going to find my landmark here in my engine clip. Alright, so my launch lug should be flush, or excuse me, in line with this motor mount tube. Alright, and we just press that in until we hit the fins. Alright, now I'm going to look down the other end here, and let me move this over. I can shine a light down inside that. There we go. Okay, so it's actually formed a nice fillet there in front of the centering ring. My camera's having a hard time focusing on it, but you can see it down there. And that's what we want. Okay. And so for now, what we'll do is let this stand in an upright position as if it were going to be launched, and let that epoxy harden. Now, just in case, it's unlikely, but I am going to put some paper towels under this just in case something leaks past the centering ring and tries to come out of the aft end of the rocket there. Okay, here's my nose cone. It has been painted. Now, I don't want to handle it too much yet because the paint has not fully cured. But I want to bring something up here. I've taken the shock cords back out of the rocket itself here. And according to the instructions, we're supposed to tie this end of the Kevlar onto the eyelet here. But then tie the elastic to this little fake carabiner here. Let's stand that up without it falling over. Now, these are okay for putting your keys on and things like this, but they're really not meant for high-stress conditions. And even though this is a mid-power rocket, it's fairly heavy, and the ejection charge could still put quite a bit of stress on it. Alright, but the manufacturers want you to put this on so that it can clip like this. Okay, I don't like this. This is not what these are meant for. Instead, I'm going to use a steel quick link here, and the main thing is getting one that will go over the eyelet, and this one just barely does. Okay, which is good because you also want this to be as light as possible. And now with this, I can connect both the elastic and the Kevlar to my quick link, I can also connect my parachute to this, so that if there is a failure here, we might lose the nose cone, but we'll keep everything else intact. Okay, I'm going to go put this nose cone away so I don't accidentally drop it and ruin the soft paint here. And when I come back, we'll connect things to the quick link. So we're going to attach this in much the same way that we did with the cable, except here I'm going to tie loops in both of them. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is take my elastic here and take enough that I can get it around my finger. Now since it is stretching, it actually gets kind of resistant there. All right, and try and keep the knot as flat as you can, like this. All right, and you don't need a big loop here. Okay, so just enough loop that you can get it onto that quick link is fine. You really don't even need to add any glue to this. You can if you want. You put a little bit of white glue on this. But because of the stretchiness and the way this is being clamped down on itself, you really don't need to. All right, over here I'm going to make another loop in the Kevlar, and this is going to be just like I did on the cable. Okay, we're just going to run that around. This one also does not need to be very big, just big enough to go on the quick link there. It too really doesn't need any glue on here, although I tend to glue Kevlar anyway because it doesn't hold knots very well. It's kind of a slick material. Oh, that's the wrong super glue. Here, let's use this one. All right, and just put a little dab there on the knot. Okay, now when we're ready for everything to go together, and I'm not going to do this with the nose cone though. Okay, so we'll have this on here. We've got our elastic. We'll have our Kevlar. All right, we'll put this on the nose cone, cinch it down. All right, and this is where the quick link is much stronger than the little carabiner is. Okay, because this gives you a good steel connection here. This is kind of flimsy. And then finally, the parachute can go on here as well. Alright, so it can clip into our quick link. And then with the nose cone on there, everything's connected on steel rather than plastic. So once we get the nose cone fully dried, we'll put everything together and put the decals on. The paint on the nose cone has now dried for 24 hours, so I'm not worried about handling it here and mushing something up. Alright, we can go ahead and take the quick link that we assembled before. Okay, and attach that. Alright, so now everything is attached there. I'm going to take my parachute here and fold it up with its shroud lines. Alright, now if I were actually preparing for launch, I would put some dog barf or blown cellulose insulation down into the body tube first. Or I would make a parachute protector out of Nomex that could go in with this. Right now I don't have that. So we're just going to put the parachute in. Okay, and then before the parachute goes in, we're just going to stuff in both shock cords. Set that over there. And you want the shock cords to kind of stay together here. You don't want to shove in one and then the other. And remember, there should be a considerable length of Kevlar beyond the length of the elastic one there. Okay, and then we'll just put our parachute in and connect this all together. Now the kit comes with a single vinyl decal here, and in the illustrations this is shown being put closer to the nose cone. I want a lot of white space on mine because students are going to sign it later. So this is going to go down here on my rocket, and I'm doing this completely opposite the launch lug so that this will be visible on the launch pad. I have here a basin of water that has just a single drop of dishwashing liquid in it, and this will allow me to temporarily have a less sticky decal, which will make it easier to reposition if I need to. Alright, so just run it through and kind of squeegee off the excess. And then we can go ahead and place this, and if necessary, replace it. Okay, so I can just pick it up again until I get it exactly where I want it. Okay. It's about where I want it there. Once you have it in place, then take some tissues or a rag or paper towel here, and then you can squeegee down the length of this to remove the excess water. This will also help remove any air bubbles that get trapped in there. Okay, after about 24 to 48 hours, this should be fully re-stickified and will be permanent. Okay, now if you want to go more toward with what the illustration looks like, this decal would go about in the middle of the rocket, and then we'd have these two decals here. These are also self-adhesive, okay, but I'm going to put some different ones on. In the illustration, this shows these being wrapped around the top and bottom of the body tube. At the forward end of the body tube, I'm going to put this Lyon College decal up close to the nose cone. This is also a vinyl decal, and so we can treat it the same way. Okay, so here I'm going to dip it into my water. Okay, and then this is going to go right along here. Okay, I'm going to have to take this off camera for just a moment. Alright, didn't have enough room there to make sure I was aligned, so now we've got it where I want it, and like before, we'll just go ahead and squeegee out the water. Now this is a thicker vinyl than the cluster duck decal was, and so it's going to have a tendency to spring back up. That will go away once the water is all fully out of it. And like the cluster duck decal itself, after 24 to 48 hours this will become completely permanent. One last thing here is that the nose cone is really loose in this, and so I'm going to put a piece of masking tape around it. And you don't even necessarily need a full circumference here, just enough to make sure that it's not going to come out on its own. Okay, so now from tip to stern here, this is my Lyon College themed cluster duck. Alright, here we go from the other way so the decal is upright. Hope you had as much fun building this as I did. It was kind of a complex kit, and we had a few setbacks with missing pieces. But all in all, this was kind of fun to do. It's definitely going to be a fun one to fly. regardless of whether you use a single motor or all 7. This should be pretty impressive. Have a great launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.